Hello everybody and welcome to Commsverse. This session is called How to Successfully Migrate Your Users' Voice Services to Microsoft Teams, and today will be presented to you by Torren Manson. Over to you, Torren. Torren, are you good to go? Do you have your microphone unmuted?
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we are good. We can hear you now. Thank you, Torren. Good
Wonderful.
to go.
One day they'll get the headsets and everything connected up in sync.
Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's 6 a.m. where I am, and I'm excited today to have gotten up at 5 in the morning and made some coffee and speak to you today about getting your users to voice on Microsoft Teams. A little bit about me. My name is Torren Manson. I'm an MVP for Office Applications and Services, also known as Teams. A whole bunch of technical certifications, and I live in the itty-bitty town of Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada. Fun fact, there's a little part here in British Columbia that is technically a desert, and I live there, and so it will actually be a hot day today in Canada rather than an igloo day. Thank you very much to our sponsors. They are really the people who are allowing the show to go forward for you. Do make sure that you check them out in their booths. The booth function is pretty great, and it's a fantastic opportunity to ask them all of the questions that you'll need. And in fact, during this presentation, I'll call out some of the particular sponsors that are here today whose solutions I'm talking about. And what we're talking about today is successfully migrating to Teams Voice. That could be from Skype for Business, from Skype for Business Online, or some other PBX, maybe an Avaya or a Cisco or ShoreTel, or something even older and more random. You could go to calling plans or direct routing, or possibly even use both, but not use Cloud Connector Edition or on-premises call handling. And we'll dive into all of these definitions if you're not super clear on what they are or what some of the differences might be. And then at the end, we have Torren's terrific top 10 Teams telephony troubleshooting tips. And yes, it did take me a while to come up with that. So some definitions. If I write SFB, that means Skype for Business of any flavor, server, on-premises, online, hybrid. If I put SFBS or SFB on-prem is usually what I put. That's your Skype for Business servers in your server closet or in a data center that you're connected to. Skype for Business hybrid is the connection of the two. Your Skype for Business in your office, connected up to Skype for Business Online or to Teams. SFBO is Skype for Business Online. Phone system is when Microsoft Teams is your PBX. Teams is providing your phone services for something other than peer-to-peer voice call. A calling plan is when Microsoft is your telephony provider, and this is available in less than 10 countries worldwide. And direct routing is when you connect Teams to a certified session border controller, and that session border controller connects to your existing telephony provider or your existing PBX, or really anything you want to at that point. If you are moving your phone services to Microsoft or even to another carrier, you will need to port. Porting is the act of moving some or all of your phone numbers from one carrier to another. In some regions of the world, you must port all of your numbers that appear on a bill or on a circuit together in one bundle, but in other regions like where I live, you can partially port. You can take just some of your numbers and move them to a different carrier. There is one restriction here in that you can't partial port away the billing telephone number. Usually you will get a phone number that is used as your account number for billing purposes. And a lot of organizations historically have gone ahead and used that phone number as their main telephone number. And that poses a bit of a problem when we're doing migrations, because we can't take that number and move it away from the other numbers because it's the billing telephone number. So that makes a bit of a mess if that's the case. And typically you can only have one port order active at a time. That becomes a problem when we're doing partial ports, when we have analog devices that we want to port away from a PRI so that we can port some of the other numbers to, say, a SIP trunk. Analog devices are your fax, your modem, your elevator safety phone, an alarm system, or a door buzzer. None of these things can go to Teams. Your best action here is to put those on separate circuits. Look at 4G, 5G, LTE wireless for things like your alarm system, and then there's no cables to cut. For that door interphone, there's a sponsor here called Hello Door, and they have a really excellent product that will modernize that door buzzer experience and get away from a little speaker in a tin can with a button on it. The process of requesting a port, having that port approved by Microsoft and by the carrier that is losing the numbers and moving them to Microsoft, can take a couple of days to get through at the best of times, up to a couple of weeks, and then they have to schedule them for a time that works for that carrier. And for Microsoft, they don't necessarily give you a lot of input into whether the time works for you. They'll give you a date like Friday, July 24th, and they'll give you a time like 9 to 11 a.m. is when they'll start. This can pose a bit of a problem for you because your business is open and operating at this point, and if they port numbers while you're in the middle of a phone call, that phone call is going to drop. People aren't going to reach you until everything is complete. So it's a bit of a mess in that regard. It can take a little bit of planning to make sure that the boss isn't planning any large meetings or anything on that particular day. One of the good things about this amount of time that it takes is you can come into Microsoft 365, into the Teams Admin Center or via PowerShell, and you can configure your users with these phone numbers before the port has actually taken place, so that when it does take place, it's just on and your users are working. So that certainly takes care of some of the pain there. One thing that I will point out with porting, though, is any kind of a rollback can be quite painful. Generally, the carrier that is giving up the numbers has a technician who's just sitting there. They run through a script to release them, and that's it. They move on to their next task. So to, in some sort of an emergency, bring the numbers back to that originating carrier will probably consume most of your day. So this is not a very granular approach for migrating, but it can be useful if you've got a well thought out, well practiced process in place. Well practiced, right? We're talking about porting all of your phone numbers to another carrier, and you do this all the time. So if this is something that's new to you, go ahead, reach out, grab a partner who does this all the time, and they can help you through it and really give you a sense of calmness about the migration. So if we're not going to do calling plans and port our numbers to Microsoft, we can do what's called direct routing. And this is where we take an existing PSTN circuit and we tie it into a session border controller somehow. This might be physically moving a PRI ISDN line from the old PBX to the session border controller. It might be a new SIP trunk to the session border controller off to the telco. It could be a new SIP trunk or a PRI between a session border controller and an existing PBX. There's a whole variety of ways of doing this, and pros and cons to both of them that are probably their own session in and of themselves. The great thing about this is that it's very granular and gives you lots of control. That session border controller is essentially a SIP firewall and a SIP router. It is very intelligent and can give you a whole bunch of resources as to how you run your migration. You can have options to statically route calls. A call comes into the session border controller, it looks up at a table and it goes, where is Torren? Aha, Torren is on Teams, I'll route the call up to him. It can do a lookup in Active Directory and look at some of the parameters of my user in Active Directory and determine whether or not a call should go to Skype for Business or maybe off to Teams, or if you get creative and you use some of the extended attributes in Active Directory, you can even use Active Directory as your own database for a good number of different PBXs that you can route your call to. There are also solutions like ARM from Audio Codes and PSX from Ribbon. These are essentially large routing databases for your entire organization. Maybe if you're a global customer, that the session border controllers can do a lookup in and determine where a user is and how the call should get to them. If you are doing kind of a not so quick but a dirty migration over a short period of time, you can do something with the 404 user not found code. What I mean by this is if a call comes into the session border controller, the session border controller sends it up to Skype for Business servers, and Skype for Business goes, nope, I don't have anybody by the name of Torren here with that phone number, 404 user not found. Session border controller goes, all right, I'll send it to Teams, and it sends it up to Teams, and there I am, I get my call. This works, it's really quick, there's no noticeable setup lag or extra duration in the call setup process. The downside of this is now I've got all of these errors in my logs that say 404 not found. And if you're using your logs, if you're all using your logs, right? Everybody does that. You check out all your logs all the time. This can be a real mess, especially if you're trying to troubleshoot during this migration. But if you need something really quick to help you do a bit of a migration over a short amount of time, this can work for sure. Certified session border controllers. It's super important that your session border controllers be certified. This process makes sure that they will talk properly to Teams and be able to handle all of the call scenarios like moving from a two-way call to a three-way call, simultaneous ring, forwarding calls, transferring calls. Ringback is a great one that Cisco is notorious for in the Skype for Business world as not doing. Ringback is when I call someone and I hear ringing in my ear, what device is playing that ringing sound? And Cisco devices just won't play that appropriately to Microsoft resources, just the difference in the way the SIP stacks are written. Microsoft and Cisco got together and they solved this issue around Teams, and you may have heard of something called the Ringback bot. That is a Microsoft bot that will provide this ringback for you if you are interoperating with a Cisco Cube, which was just certified, but not for media bypass, which is a topic we'll get to in our next slide. And Avaya is said to be working away very quickly on getting their session border controllers certified as well. So pretty quickly here, we're going to have all of the main session border controllers certified for work with Teams. And the folks from Audio Codes, Ribbon, and AnyNode are in the exhibit hall. Please do stop by and have a chat with them if you have any questions about session border controllers. They would all be happy to help you out. So media bypass is the idea that in an organization, it doesn't make sense for your media, your voice from your phone or your headset to go across your organization and then back across your organization between various systems. In the Teams world, this is the idea that if I've got my session border controller in my physical office building or local to me in town, if I'm working from home, it doesn't make sense for me to send my audio up to the cloud and then have it come back down to the cloud to go to the session border controller in my own location to go out for a local phone call. So media bypass allows my user to have that audio go straight to the session border controller. and that's the green line here that you can see, where it goes way up into the Microsoft Cloud and then back down to the session border controller. This is a stock Microsoft diagram from docs.microsoft.com, but what I did is I stretched it out and I moved the internet and the Microsoft phone system, or formerly Cloud PBX, way over to the side, just to give a little more exaggeration to the fact that your signaling in a media bypass world still goes up through the cloud, but your media goes directly to that session border controller in red and out to the PSTN trunk. So auto attendance and call queues. I've rarely met an organization that is doing voice of any sort that doesn't have an auto attendance or a call queue. So a response group, an IVR, a tree, anything like that that needs to be implemented. There are a couple of interesting facets around this. Cloud auto attendance and call queues in Teams can get their service via calling plans or direct routing. So you can assign a phone number to those through either path. But if you are using direct routing, your calls cannot be directed to a Skype for Business endpoint. Direct routing doesn't know how to get numbers to Skype for Business users because direct routing is a Teams thing. So be aware of that. That's caught a few people off guard. And what they've had to do is set up a temporary calling plan phone number and set up a call forward on their session border controller to send those calls from the direct route out to the calling plan. And then once it's there, through the calling plans are Skype for Business aware and can get those calls to the users. Dial-in conferencing is only available via Microsoft, with the exception of the US government cloud for security reasons. To me, this is a good thing. I've had a number of small organizations in the Link and the Skype for Business days have issues with 20 channels on their SIP trunk, and they try and hold a town hall meeting or something like that, and they've got people who can't dial in because they've consumed all of their channels in a meeting, or there's a meeting going on and all the channels are consumed, and no one else can place any regular phone calls. Meeting rooms are something else to pay a little bit of attention to. They're a bit weird. You can give them a phone number via calling plans or direct routing to be able to dial into them. But when they dial out as the conference bridge, so a random Microsoft number, and not with that calling plan or direct routing number. So their outbound calls will always go via Microsoft and not back out through your direct routing. This one caught me off guard when I first came across it. It's not very well explained in the Microsoft documentation, but it is something to be aware of. Of course, this is when you're using your meeting room device just as a regular old phone, which is probably pretty rare other than for an occasional phone call or two. So we're talking about migrating our voice to Teams, but really it's more than just voice. We've got some underlying requirements in that our Teams user has to be in Teams only mode in order to receive their voice in Teams. So we've got to have migrated them to Teams now. They can't be in Islands mode. They can't be in any of these other interop modes. There's a variety of other functionality in Microsoft 365, formerly Office 365, that needs online functionality or hybrid functionality or some minimum version of things like SharePoint and Exchange. Delegates are a mess. You've got a boss and you've got their admin or their assistant. And there's a bunch of complications around that because you can't be a delegate of someone else if they're on a different platform. So you can't move the boss online and have their assistant still be in on-prem. It doesn't work. You've got to move them both. If you're in something like a university where there's pooled resources for faculty and things like that, these delegation scenarios can get into quite a big web. I've seen one where when we used a tool to map everything out, there was over 10,000 people were all tied together that would need to move at once. And this poses problems when you're trying to move say, a department all at once, because some of their users are in this big ball of 10,000 users who all have delegates pointing around to each other in some sort of an entangled web. There's a bunch of really great exchange tools out there that are designed around providing you a batch of mailboxes to move at one time, and they'll sort out this delegate or this permission back and forth for you. And that will help you identify your Skype for Business and your Teams users that have these delegations between each other. So your delegates are often executives or VIPs, and one of the struggles that I run into every once in a while is that, migrating to Exchange Online isn't on our roadmap until 2022. Okay, but if you were to go to Exchange Online sooner, you could get more functionality and better functionality specifically around these people, the executives and the VIPs. And very often the solution that we work out is not that we need to speed up the overall migration, but that we need to do some selective migration of mailboxes to the online environment, just to ensure that those executives, those VIPs, those people that need the white glove treatment can get better service from being in one solid, consistent environment. We've got another complication coming up in that Skype for Business Online has an end of service date coming up in about a year at the end of July 2021. That sounds really weird to be saying in about a year, but it really is in about a year. So if your migration plans involve Skype for Business Online in any way, that includes Skype for Business Hybrid, then you need to be done by the end of July 2021, or you need to do kind of more of a bulk move than a migration. So no Skype for Business Online means Skype for Business Hybrid is gone. It means you don't get to move your buddy list or your contact list during a migration. The split domain functionality between Skype for Business on premises and the online world, so using Torren.ca as your SIP address in those two different platforms, is done via the hybrid mechanism, which is gone. So hopefully there's going to be some sort of announcement about an ability to make this happen in a nice fashion without the Skype for Business Online functionality coming soon. But this is something that I see a lot of concern around with customers right now. And Skype for Business Online users will be automatically moved to Teams. So July 31st, 2021, you'll be a Skype for Business Online user. August 1st, you'll just automatically be a Teams only user. If that Skype for Business user is using on-premises call handling or Cloud Connector Edition, i.e. they get their voice services through Skype for Business infrastructure that's on your LAN, on your on-premises environment, that will break. That's part of the Skype for Business hybrid process, the Skype for Business online process, that is going away. The good news is, if you're doing that, there's some pretty simple methods to get those users to direct routing and onto Teams. So really, I guess the point of this slide is, if you are in a split environment between Skype for Business and Teams, or Skype for Business and Skype for Business Online, you need to speed up the process of your migration to Teams and make sure that you're wrapped up probably by March 2021, just to give yourself a lot of cushion there. Your network gets dragged kicking and screaming into Microsoft Teams. A little bit less now in a work from home COVID type of scenario, but still very applicable. You should be using the Microsoft Network Assessment Tool. Currently, I think it's still called the Skype for Business Network Assessment Tool. It sends a 17-second audio clip up to the cloud and analyzes the results, checks your connectivity to make sure your firewall is open appropriately. Speaking of firewalls, you'll need to check your firewall regardless of the brand that it is, Get rid of anything smart on any firewall. The exception to that is names and groups. Firewalls now will allow you, when you're building out your rules, to pick Microsoft 365 Teams Voice, for example, as a destination, and they update that in the background as a process with Microsoft, so that you don't have to worry about all the FQDNs and IP addresses. But please turn off application layer gateways, inspection, all of that kind of stuff, because absolutely zero of the firewall manufacturers out there understand Skype for Business or Teams and how Microsoft is doing SIP. They'll try and decrypt the traffic, and once it's decrypted, they'll try and do stuff with it, and it's just not going to work well. Make sure your offices have local internet breakout, including DNS. It does you no good if you're breaking out to internet access in Toronto, but your DNS is being provided in the UK. You'll be directed to the wrong spot on the globe for your Teams connectivity. You need to start off with a proof of concept, then move to a pilot, then move to production. Don't try and just turn all of this on and make it go as you're doing it. Don't skip these stages. Try out these various interop modes and see how they work for all of the users in your organization in your proof of concept. So as you move a user from Skype for Business into Microsoft Teams, you need to pay attention to not only that user's experience, but the other users as they're collaborating with that user who's being migrated. Make sure when you do this that you consider all of the modalities. So does their presence work? How does their presence work? Oh, their presence goes away in SharePoint when they're moved to Teams. How is the chat and the IM experience, the video experience? Escalating to meetings. When a Skype for Business user invites a Teams user to a meeting or wants to share their screen, it doesn't just start up like it does when they're on the same platform. They get instant messaged a link that takes them to a Skype for Business meeting. So be aware of how all of this works before you start rolling it out to your users. Don't forget about all of the fun voice bits about interoperability between Teams, Skype for Business, any other PBX that you have. You'll need to worry about number formats. So how many digits is my telephone company sending in to me? How many digits do they expect back? What do I need to include for the caller ID? There's privacy headers for blocking your caller ID or blocking your information about who you are and what IP address you're on. There's your identity and the history of that call flow through your organization. I talked a bit earlier about Cisco not being able to do ringback with the Microsoft world for interoperability. That's been solved now with Teams, but we've still got to look at call forwarding transfers, putting another call on hold. Does that work? Can I take them off of hold? That's a huge one, that if you miss that, someone's going to go ahead and put a user on hold, and it's going to be an important call, and you'll hear about it because the call will drop, and then they'll try it again and it'll drop, and then you're in trouble because you missed something in the migration. Extension and shortcode dialing. If you're coming from PBX world, this is maybe still a thing where people want to do their 4-digit dialing to other offices. That's simple enough to configure in Teams as long as those 4 digits match up somehow with the full phone number of the user. And emergency calling is a whole session in and of itself. And thankfully, there is a session July 7th at midnight British Standard Time by Anthony called Emergency Calling. The Life You Save might just be your own. I'm a bit mixed on this because I've got another session at the same time, but I will go ahead and say that if you are setting up a phone system and you have questions about emergency calling, Anthony's session here is one that you should absolutely be in attendance at, or at the very least ensure that you have access to the recording. That'll be a fantastic session for sure, and I will be watching it on the recording just to see what I've missed and what other tips I can pick up from him and his experience. There's excellent functionality in Teams for emergency calling, especially in the US. One of the things that a lot of organizations aren't necessarily prepared for when I start engaging with them is the need to gather their IP subnets and locations just into a spreadsheet is fine, because we need to tie these locations together. So when someone places an emergency call from 192.168.1.5, they're in the Vancouver office, not the Toronto office and not the London, UK office. So I know where to send the emergency call to, rather than saying, oh, Torren's a Canadian, he's a couple hours away from Vancouver, we'll send it there, regardless of the fact that he's currently visiting the Toronto office kind of thing, or working from home, for example. So into my troubleshooting tips. My tip number one is documentation. When you're trying to figure something out, why it's not working, pull up your documentation and refresh yourself on how it's supposed to work, and then map out through that process of how it's supposed to work, where it's not working out. If you need to, we talked about some test plans earlier, go through those test plans and run them again and see what happens. And your documentation isn't something that, oh, the project's over, we got to get around to writing documentation on what we did. This is the absolute backwards approach to it. Your documentation, or your as-built documentation for after your project is complete, should be done before your project, and it's called your design document. Your design document describes what you're going to build, then you should build it, and guess what? Your documentation's done. And if there are any changes along the way, there usually are, just incorporate those into your design document as you go, and you're done. You're complete. You've got documentation for your system. So a fun lesson learned. I was up at 3 or 4 in the morning with a customer, and absolutely everything was working except for international calls. And one of the guys on the customer's team wanted to roll back, and in order to do the rollback, we would need to make phone calls and wake up executives and make a decision within the next 45 minutes or so whether we were going to go ahead and roll back or push forward. Luckily, this was a PRI swap, so we were able to pull the PRI from the Skype for Business solution, plug it back into the old legacy PBX system, and try that same international call. Well, it turns out they never could call international calls anyway. So now something I do before I do a migration to a new system is I run through my test plan on the old system so that I know exactly what my results should be as I carry things forward to that new system, so that I'm not having to make those agonizing decisions to roll back at 4 a.m. only to find out I didn't have to, we were done and everything was working. Troubleshooting tip number 2 is wait. Microsoft 365 updates can take a while, up to 24 hours. I've seen them take a little longer for some things to percolate and run through the system. And the takeaway here really is don't plan for midweek cutovers. Don't expect to do some migrations from Skype for Business to Teams on Tuesday nights and have those users up and working first thing Wednesday morning. It sucks to lose your weekends, but really right now, that's what you need to do. Troubleshooting tip number 3 is the right tool at the right time. You don't show up as a crash investigator to a car crash and pull out a microscope and start looking at sheet metal or engine components. You're doing a more large-scale approach. You're taking pictures. You might even use a drone to look overhead. You're looking for dash cam videos, things like that, to clue you into where to look for the specific cause of what's going on. So make sure you're not getting too deep into the weeds. Don't be starting up Wireshark or syslogs on your gateways and your session border controllers right away. Check your services, check Event Viewer, check your high-level logs, swap users and devices. If John can't make a call on his new PC and Sarah can on hers, what happens if Sarah and John log onto each other's PCs or log onto Teams on each other's PCs? Can they make that phone call? does the issue follow the PC or the user? There's a great clue as to what you need to look at. Tip number 4 is to dive into the client logs. They are a bit uglier in Microsoft Teams versus Skype for Business, but they are there, and they are very detailed. You can search for keywords like fail, and there are perhaps hours upon hours of sessions that would be required to dive into what some of the specific things mean in there, but it's all human readable. So if you're really stuck, this might be an opportunity for you, or even engage on some of the forums in the tech community, and someone might say, hey, can you post a client log and we'll read through it for you. All of the rest of the tips are around the CS online user command, the get CS online user command. It's a huge hot mess. There's about 300 lines of output right now. So I like to break it down. I pipe the output to the select statement, and then I'll look for some keywords and I'll wrap those keywords in asterisks. So I'm looking here for voice. So I'm getting my hosted voicemail status, my voice policy, my online voice routing policy. So I can see here that my on-prem enterprise voice enabled is false. So hey, this is an online user. My hosted voicemail is set to true. Okay, that's not the reason that I'm not getting my voicemail, right? Enterprise voice enabled is true. That's a good thing. We can see here my voice policy and my hosted voicemail policy are business voice. So this is showing that I'm a calling plan Teams user. Once you've stared at these things long enough, you'll pick these up. Comparisons between users are great, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Selecting URI is great to find out the user's phone number. This top example is a calling plan user. So the phone number shows up under line URI. The phone number will always show under line URI, but we can see that it's not showing up on the on-prem line URI, and it's not showing up as being manually set online. On the other hand, for a direct routing user, we can show that they've got an on-prem line URI, because direct routing is considered an on-prem voice capacity delivered by the session border controller, and we can see that it was manually set. There is something called the interpreted user type. So you can dive in here and you can see what type of user Microsoft 365 thinks someone is. This is really handy during migrations, because if Microsoft 365 is still showing them as an on-prem SFB user, then your migration to Teams isn't complete. You might just need to wait a little bit longer. So in the top example, we're looking at my user that was created specifically in the online environment. Absolutely no on-prem anything there. In the second one, the user was created in Active Directory and Skype for Business on premises and migrated to Skype for Business Online and then set to Teams only mode. And the bottom example, I think, is really interesting because it's just one user, but it shows up twice, because right now they're in Active Directory and Skype for Business on premises, but they've been enabled for Teams in Islands mode. So Islands mode is the pure online, no service. The no service means they're not going to get their PSTN service. They're not going to be able to communicate to other people over Federation to Skype for Business from Teams in Islands mode. And the hybrid on-prem SFB user is that created an Active Directory, Skype for Business, getting your services there. Tip number 8 is to select based on time, and you'll see some timestamps here. Don't worry so much about the specific timing of all of these timestamps, but if you've just moved a bunch of users and these timestamps aren't updating, probably all of that replication in Microsoft 365 hasn't worked its way over to the Teams side of things yet. Wait a little bit, try it again. Tip number 9 is to select abled, and this will tell you anything that is enabled or disabled. This one is actually a bit longer than shown in this screenshot, but it will give you all of those real quick things like, did I remember to enable them for enterprise voice? Are they still enabled for enterprise voice on premises. They shouldn't be if you've moved them to the cloud. Where's their voicemail set up as being enabled at? Is the user enabled? So it's a really quick view to make sure that all of these settings make sense for what you're seeing. And another one that runs over the length of a screenshot is policy. So if you're wondering, is this user receiving the correct policy that I've just edited and that I've just set for them? This is how you would find that out. There's a large list of them in here. So one thing that you can do here that I find handy if Bob works but Sarah doesn't is do a get CS online user for both of them and put those into a tool like Notepad++ that allows you to do document comparisons and step through those policies. If they're supposed to have the same policies and the same settings as each other than obvious things like SIP address and phone number, compare them side to side and see if you can spot any differences between them. There's 300 lines of output, so this is probably not something you want to try and scroll through manually if you can avoid it. There's some document comparison tools online as well. So if you find yourself without the ability to get your hands on Notepad++, there's some online comparisons as well. And that is the end of my session. Thank you very much. Please go to the goteams.fan/survey, and this is session 123. You do need to enter that session number into the survey engine. We're very interested in knowing how the session was for you and what feedback you have for us. I will be heading to the breakout room for some interactive Q&A for anyone who wants shortly, and the URL for that is the goteamsfan/BRK123.
Thank you, Torren. We now have some questions from our audience that I shall read out for you before we head to the breakout area. So the first one is from Anonymous, and I think this one is more of a statement than a question. It reads, if a user is not assigned a conference license, they will use DR to make the outbound call to invite an attendee into the conference call. Anything to comment on that one?
If the user is not assigned a conferencing license?
Correct, yes. If the user is not assigned a conferencing license, they will use DR to make the outbound call to invite an attendee into the conference call.
So when you have the dial-in conferencing license assigned, that's what gets you the phone number and the ability for people to dial into your meetings. The dial-out behavior is a bit differently. You get, I think it's 60 minutes now per user per month with that license for dialing out to other parties from a conference. If you don't have that license and that's 60 minutes and that's pooled with all of your users, if you don't have access to that, then you can use, if your administrator has allowed it, communication credits to do a pay-as-you-go dial out. So you can do it. It would not be through direct routing. It would still be through the Microsoft system as the conference bridge dialing out.
Okay, great. The next one we have is also from an anonymous audience member who is asking, can I check that users' current Skype contact lists will not be migrated once Skype for Business Online has gone? In order to get that, you must migrate before July 2021, ? Is there any other way to migrate them?
There is no other way to migrate them at this point, no.
Okay, fantastic. The next one, also an anonymous, is hello. With the following scenario, Skype for Business on-prem with enterprise voice with global sites footprint 25K plus users, Skype hybrid with O365, especially for cloud voicemail feature, Exchange Online. Question is, will this setup be supported till July 2021 or till 2023? That was a long question.
That setup, because it relies on Skype for Business Online, will be available until July 2021.
Okay, brilliant. Then we have a question from Venkat, who, and this is a very popular one with 8 likes, asking, can we get some PowerPoint slides of this session, please?
Yes, I have a link and instructions to upload this presentation, and it should be up there as soon as we wrap up the breakout chat.
Okay, great. Just a few more to go. Again, from an anonymous, difference between on-prem URI and online URI, should both be applicable for DR user?
No, for a direct routing user, they should not have anything for the online URI fields, but they will always have something in the line URI field. In my screenshots, that was the field over on the far right. Whatever your line URI is that's in effect will always be in that far right column on my screenshots. When that comes from the on-premises organization, you'll also see that over in the left with that manually assigned. And the on-premises organization would be direct routing, or currently some of the other processes that are available there for Skype for Business Online user.
Okay, great. And we have just 2 more to go. This one is from Andras. Regarding analog devices, we can't register these as CS analog device anymore, like in Skype for Business. The problem is we have to manage this somehow in the voice routing, which could be a huge pain if we're talking about routing to different branch sites, for example, media packs. Do you have any good recommendation for these scenarios?
Yeah, this is a common issue that a number of organizations run into. When you've got your media pack devices in all of your different offices, you really do need to start relying on routing at a higher level, so country code or area code, depending on what your organization looks like. And you might be able to rely on the session border controller that you're doing your direct routing with to help you out with this. So your Teams environment can send all of the calls to the session border controller, and then the session border controller can handle all of that routing to the different areas. It's a little more graceful than Teams as far as analogs go.
Okay, great, thank you. And the last question from Anonymous, a difference between on-prem enterprise voice enabled and enterprise voice enabled line URI and on-prem line URI.
Okay, can you say those again for me?
Certainly, yes. I think what's being asked is, what is the difference between on-prem enterprise voice enabled and enterprise voice enabled line URI and on-prem line URI?
Okay, I wonder if that was this troubleshooting tip number 6. So the on-prem line URI is a phone number that is assigned to you through an on-premises method, which could be Cloud Connector Edition or on-premises call handling for a Skype for Business Online user, or it could be direct routing for a Teams user. Regardless of how your phone number is assigned to you, it will show up in the line URI field. And then the on-prem line URI manually set is showing that you as the administrator went in and configured that on-premises line URI phone number.
Amazing, thank you, Torren. Okay, so that's all the questions, and that is all the time we have for this session. If you'd like to talk some more with Torren following the session, you can find the session breakout. You can find him in the session breakout area after this, which is in the Q&A chat. Please check that for the link to join. And thank you very much for joining the meeting. Thank you, Torren.
Thank you all. We'll see you in the breakout.